Hello friends, welcome back to the channel. Today, let's talk about a 2016 Ugandan biographical movie. If you've not subscribed, please subscribe to help us out. Our story is set in Katwe, a mildly populated community in Uganda. There we are introduced to our protagonist Fiona, who lives with her mother Naku, her two brothers Brian and Richard, and also with her prodigal sister Night. Fiona's father died while she was little, and since then, the family lives off the selling of maize, and also stays in a dilapidated shanty which they struggle to pay its rent. While selling their maize one day, Brian becomes the first to finish his, so he hands his basket to his sister Fiona. His sister asks him where he is heading, but he shoves her off and tells her to continue with her selling. Thereafter, we see Brian watching some group of kids play soccer. Then we are introduced to Roberts. Roberts is a talented engineer, looking for a well-paying job, and he also uses his spare time to coach kids in football and chess. While coaching the kids one day, he sees Brian sitting and not taking part in football, so he asks him why he is not taking part in the game. Brian says he might sustain injuries during a football match, and he does not have money for hospital bills. Roberts tells the children about the game of chess, so he invites them to join him at the spot where he teaches other kids to master the game. When Brian leaves, as usually the next day, Fiona follows behind him and sees where Roberts teaches other Katwe kids to play chess. While Roberts is setting up for their practice, he sees Fiona standing by, so he invites her inside to join them. When she gets in the midst of the other children, they make fun of her and berate her for smelling so badly. When she had gotten enough, she gets in a fight with one of the boys. Roberts acknowledges her fighting spirit, then he hands her a cup of porridge he is sharing to the kids in his team, and then he officially welcomes her to the team. Roberts hands Fiona to Gloria, and then he tells her to teach Fiona the basics of the game of chess. After teaching Fiona the basics of the game, Gloria chases Fiona away because of her bad smell. Fiona has taken interest in the game of chess, so she decides to clean herself up anytime she is going for her chess practice. Cut to a few months after, Fiona is now good in the game of chess. She defeats the boys in the team, and even defeats the reigning champion of their team. When Roberts sees this, he asks her how she managed to learn most of the tricks she is using. Fiona replies by saying she just reasoned out most of the moves she makes, as she is not literate enough to read books about chess. Afterwards, Roberts is pressured by the kids to take them to play games against the boys in the city, so Roberts decides to apply for an upcoming chess competition in the city. He manages to secure a meeting with the chairman of the Chess Federation, Enoch. After some minutes of refusing his request, Roberts manages to convince Enoch to register his kids in the competition. Later on, we see Roberts heading for paid football game, with the children also following him. He is taking part in the game in order to raise money for the application fee. During the game, Roberts scores a goal, then he goes to the children to celebrate with them. Afterwards, he takes the money he earned, and then he pays for the application fee of the competition. When Roberts gets home, his wife Hope berates him for playing football for money, knowing he has already sustained injuries in the past. He manages to convince her that the money was for the kids' competition, so she eventually forgives him. Elsewhere, Naku is informed that her kids are being used by Roberts for monetary purposes, so she goes there and drags out her kids, not wanting to hear what Roberts has to say. Later on, Roberts finds Naku in the market and convinces her to allow her children go to the competition. Afterwards, Roberts takes the kids on a bus ride to the venue where the competition will be happening in the big city. When they get there, the children develops cold feet, because they've never been to the city before. When Roberts goes to check up on them at night, he sees them sleeping on the floor, instead of the mattress that was provided for them. They are used to sleeping on the floor, so sleeping on such a mattress is alien to them. When the time for the competition comes, the kids are paired with other kids from different schools, with Fiona getting the strongest of them all. Within a few minutes into the game, one of the kids, Ben, checkmates his opponent. After this, the other slum kids gets motivated and also win their games, with Fiona also defeating the school's champion. When the final results are called, the slum kids take first position, and Fiona also ends up as the best player of the tournament with a medal to her name. While heading home, Fiona asks Robert if she won because of pity, but Roberts assures her that her victory was as a result of her talent. Later on, Roberts brings Fiona to his home and introduces her to his wife, who is also a school teacher. While they are chatting, Hope notices Fiona's inability to read books, so she decides to teach her how to do so. While Fiona and Brian are selling maize one day, Brian gets hit by a bike and falls unconscious on the floor. Fiona manages to get a bike man to help him, using the whole money she has made from the sales of her maize. After getting treated for his injuries, Naku quietly sneaks Brian out of the hospital, because she has no money to pay for the bills. When they get home, they find their landlady already locked them out of the shanty for failure to pay their rent. After failing to provide the money to her, the landlady throws their things out, leaving them stranded with nowhere to go. Later at night, they manage to find a shelter to lay their head, but Pina has completely lost interest in playing chess. When Roberts visits them one day, he plays a game with Fiona and manages to defeat her very easily. Seeing how demotivated Fiona is, he advises her against giving up on her dream because of her present circumstance. Afterwards, Fiona and Brian return back to training, with the other kids excited on seeing them return after a long time. Cut to a few weeks, Fiona begins playing in different state competitions, and also wins different trophies. Her family manages to gather some money for themselves, so they move to a much better place. Afterwards, the slum kids gets the opportunity to represent their country in an international competition in Sudan, with Fiona and 2 other kids being chosen from the team. Roberts manages to convince Naku to allow Fiona travel out of the country, with the promise of getting her into his wife's school once they return. When they get to the venue, Fiona and her team gets paired with kids from other countries to practice before the main competition. While they are chatting, Fiona gets to know that one can become a grandmaster in chess, and also make a lot of money from it. Afterwards, the competition is played, then Fiona's team claims the top spot, which in turn makes them popular in Uganda, and also in their hometown Kotwe. When they return from the competition, Fiona becomes proud and refuses to do any chores in the house, even with her mother's constant plea. Later on, Naku reports the issue to Roberts, blaming him for changing her daughter's attitude. Hearing this, Roberts goes to their house to talk to Fiona, but all his advice falls on deaf ears. Shortly after, Fiona requests to play in the chess Olympiad taking place in Russia. The chess community advises against it, stating that Fiona is not experienced enough for such a competition. Fiona remains adamant about wanting to go international, so her request is eventually granted by the committee. Cut to a few days after, Fiona is on a plane heading to Russia for the chess Olympiad competition. Robert advises her against being overconfident, but Fiona takes it as her teachers not having faith in her. When the competition starts, Fiona is paired with a Canadian chess master. Filled with ego and overconfidence, Fiona makes a wrong move and eventually loses the game against the Canadian. Devastated, Fiona runs outside crying and berating herself for her foolishness. Robert sees this and consoles her, telling her that failure is part of the game of chess. Afterwards, Fiona goes back to her normal life in Kotwe, with Roberts also getting a well-paying job at an engineering firm. He declines the job offer, feeling that he has a duty of helping the students of the slums. Rather than berating him, Hope supports his decision and tells him she will stand by him no matter what. After some time, Roberts fulfills his promise of admitting the children into a school under his expenses. Meanwhile, Fiona goes back to playing chess and also participates in some state competitions, winning all of them. Roberts suggests she participate in a national competition coming soon, then the scene cuts to Fiona entering venue of the competition. Fiona is paired against Christine in the final round of the women's category, and then we see her mother and her siblings also watching from the stands. When the game begins, Fiona seems confused by some of Christine's moves. She eventually gets rid of her fears and defeats Christine, making her coach and members of her family jump for joy. When they return from the competition, Fiona is welcomed by the people of her community in a grand style. A writer publishes a biography of Fiona, giving her an attractive sum of money from the sales of the book. In the concluding scene, we see that Fiona has bought a house for her mother, bringing tears of joy to her face. Moral of the story: you can become whatever you dream of, never underestimate yourself. If you love the story, please subscribe to help the channel out. Also, check out our channel for more interesting stories.